Good evening, dear listener. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet hour here. Perhaps you've set aside a gentle corner for yourself, a chair by the window, or maybe you've stretched out beneath a soft quilt, the hum of a fan in the room, or the steady tick of a clock keeping time. Wherever you are, know that this is a space meant for rest, for memory, and for calm. Tonight, we will follow the story of a young farm boy whose heart heard the call of the sea. It is a tale of longing, of storms survived, of foreign shores glimpsed like dreams, and of homecomings that are never quite the same. Though there will be hardships along the way, what you will hear is not meant to stir alarm, but to soothe. The rhythm of oars, the hush of sails filling with wind, the quiet moments of friendship formed in the dark below deck. Before we begin, I invite you to dim the lights, if you haven't already. Perhaps let the night breeze through a cracked window, or imagine the glow of an old hearth where logs sigh as they burn down. Take one slow breath in, then let it out, just as gently. You are safe here, and you are welcome. Now let us step softly into one where the story begins with a whisper carried on the wind. A boy pauses as wind carries whispers of far shores. The fields of South Holland in early spring have their own quiet music. Before the sun is more than a pale smear along the horizon, mist curls low across the meadows, clinging to the ditches and hedgerows. A wooden gate creaks open with the weight of a boy's hand, and though the sound is small, it carries far in the morning hush. He pauses there, one boot resting on the rung, his breath forming a faint cloud in the cool air. What he hears is not only the call of geese overhead, or the trickle of water slipping through a sluice, but something less certain, more insistent. The restless sound of the wind itself, whispering of places he has never seen. His name is John, the youngest son of a farmer who rises before dawn and expects his children to do the same. The others hurry about their chores, their figures half lost in the gray fog, but Jan lingers by the gate. His hands curl around a few coins hidden deep in his pocket. Wages from odd jobs, a secret hoard kept close. Each clink when he shifts his weight seems louder than it ought to be, as though the very morning disapproves of his ambition. In the distance, the faint toll of a market bell drifts across the flat land. It marks the opening of stalls in the village square, where traders spread out their goods, cloth, cheese, barrels of fish, and sometimes, if one is lucky, trinkets brought from beyond the narrow borders of their county. That bell is a reminder. The world is larger than cows and turnips, larger than damp fields and the routine of milking stools. He closes the gate gently and leans on it, eyes following a faint track that winds toward the harbor town. It is not a long road, but it feels like a border between the life he knows and the one he imagines. His father speaks little. His mother hums as she works, but in Jan's head, the air is crowded with other sounds, sails snapping in the wind, gulls crying above brine-stained decks, the laughter of men who have stories to tell. That morning, while he helps drive cattle toward pasture, he finds himself distracted. The clatter of hooves on the wooden bridge becomes in his mind the drumming of waves against a ship's hull. The lowing of cows seems to mingle with the rumble of distant cannon, though he has never heard such a sound. Every ordinary note of the farm twists itself into something foreign, something calling. His brothers laugh at him for staring off too often, for losing track of the tether rope, or forgetting to latch the barn door. Head in the clouds, they tease, though their words carry little malice. Still, John feels marked apart from them. They dream of acres, of strong oxen, of wives who will bring dowries of linen and hens. He dreams instead of horizons. That evening, after the chores are done and the household has settled, he sits on the threshold of the barn. The smell of hay is sweet. The swallows dart in and out of the rafters, and the last glow of daylight clings to the thatched roofs of the village. He takes the coins from his pocket and counts them again by feel rather than sight. They are not many, but to him, they feel like a passport. Each one is a step closer to a deck beneath his boots, a mast above his head, a map spread across a captain's table. Of course, he knows nothing of storms, of cramped bunks, of salted meat crawling with weevils. His mind paints the sea as endless blue, filled with the scent of spices and the promise of fortune. The harsher truths are yet to come, like reefs lurking beneath a smooth surface. For now, the dream is enough to quicken his heart. He rises at last, brushing hay from his trousers, and glances toward the north, where the air is a shade darker. He imagines that darkness hiding sails, hiding the silhouettes of ships bound for the Indies or the Baltic, their lanterns glowing like fireflies. He imagines his own hand gripping a rope, his own eyes fixed on the widening horizon. When he finally slips inside the house, his mother is already nodding over her sewing, her candle guttering low. His father mutters something about the cows, but Jan barely hears. He climbs the ladder to the loft, where his brothers snore beneath the beams, and lies awake staring at the thatch above. The wind brushes through the cracks and seems to carry voices, low, persistent, like a secret meant only for him. He smiles into the dark, knowing that soon, somehow, he will answer that whisper. Chores feel heavier when the horizon calls quietly. The mornings on the farm began with the same unbroken rhythm. Long before the first pale light touched the edge of the dikes, the house stirred awake. The rooster called, though the family hardly needed him, for habit had already taught their bodies the hour. Jan's brothers moved with quick, sleepy efficiency, hauling on boots, pulling wool shirts over their heads, heading out toward the cows before their father's footsteps reached the threshold. Jan followed, though more slowly. The air still held the night's chill, sharp enough to redden fingers, and the ground gave off a damp smell of earth and straw. He carried a wooden pail in one hand, its handle worn smooth by years of use. In the other, he balanced a stool, 3 legs creaking with every step. His breath came in puffs, mingling with the steam that rose from the cattle, warm bodies shifting in the half-light. It should have been a comfort, this routine. The barn offered shelter, the animals knew their place, and the milk, when poured into the pail, would feed the family or be traded in the village for bread, salt, or cloth. It was steady work, honest and necessary. Yet to Jan, it felt heavier than the weight of the stool or the slosh of milk. Each morning he sat on the low seat, pressed his forehead against the cow's flank, and listened to the hollow rhythm of streams filling the pail. To him, it was not rhythm at all, but a drumbeat of sameness, repeating endlessly, without change, without horizon. Once, he paused, his hands still, and stared at the trickle of milk frothing in the bucket. The sound, he thought, was not unlike the trickle of water beneath a ship's hull. The image came so sharply he almost spilled the pail. His brother nudged him, muttering about daydreams, and Jan forced himself back to the task, cheeks burning. When chores were done, the boys carried the milk toward the house. Their father was already at the table, sharpening a knife with long, steady strokes. The rasp filled the kitchen like a second heartbeat. Jan slid into his place, bread torn by hand, the crust rough, the butter cool and pale. No one spoke much. Words were scarce on this farm, saved for when truly needed. yet silence carried its own weight. To John, it was as if every quiet chew, every scrape of the knife against wood, told him that this was all his life would ever be. Later in the morning, he was sent to the garden to weed between the rows of turnips. The earth clung stubbornly to his fingers, damp and cold, and the green smell of bruised leaves rose thick around him. He worked slowly, tugging at each plant, piling weeds into a basket. His brothers teased him for dawdling, but Jan could not hurry. His eyes strayed again and again to the narrow lane that wound toward the village. Beyond those hedges lay the square, and beyond the square lay the road to the harbor, and beyond that, though he had never seen it, lay the sea. By noon, the bell in the village tolled again, its sound drifting over the fields. The bell had marked every stage of his life, the call to market, the hours of worship, the warnings of fire. But today, it felt different. The note hung in the air like a summons, a voice deeper than his father's, older than the farm itself. Jan straightened, wiping dirt from his palms onto his trousers, and listened until the last vibration died. His heart was unsteady. The afternoon brought more tasks, mending a fence where last winter's frost had split the posts, gathering firewood, scraping mud from the ox cart. Jan obeyed, but each stroke of the knife against bark, each thud of wood on the pile, felt like the tick of a clock running down. He imagined instead the thud of waves against a ship, the creak of timbers, the groan of ropes under strain. In those imagined sounds, he heard freedom. At supper, his mother served stew of barley and onions, steam clouding the small kitchen. His brothers ate quickly, dipping crusts into the broth, swallowing without pause. January, though hungry, lingered. He studied the lamplight catching the sheen of the table, the shadows clinging to the corners, the weary bend of his father's shoulders. How many nights like this had passed already? How many more before the pattern changed? He felt the answer settle in his stomach, heavier than the stew. Too many. After the meal, when his siblings crowded around the hearth to mend harness straps or patch trousers, Jan slipped outside. The air was cooler, the sky a darkening wash of indigo, stars beginning to pierce the veil. He leaned on the small gate at the edge of the yard, the very gate that marked the border between field and road. Its hinges were stiff, its boards worn smooth where countless hands had rested before his. Yet to him, it was not only a gate of wood, but a threshold. On one side lay duty, routine, the known. On the other side lay possibility. He rested his chin on his folded arms and breathed deeply. The night air carried scents of damp earth and distant smoke, but beneath those he thought he could smell salt, faint, impossible though the sea was miles away. He smiled despite himself. Perhaps the wind carried it, or perhaps his longing invented it. Either way, it filled him with a restless warmth. Days stretched into weeks, and the pattern repeated. Morning milking, market bells, chores in field and yard, suppers heavy with silence, but within January, something shifted. Each task became a measure of his impatience. Each coin he tucked away in his small hoard grew heavier in his pocket, a reminder that he was building toward something. His father did not notice, or if he did, he gave no sign. His mother watched him sometimes with quiet eyes, as though she saw more than he wished to reveal. One evening, as they returned from the fields, Jan's eldest brother nudged him. "You stare at that lane too much," he muttered. "It won't lead you where you think." Jan said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Later, alone in the loft, he lay awake listening to the wind push against the shutters. The words echoed in his head. But rather than discourage him, they fanned the embers of resolve. Perhaps his brother was right. The lane itself might not lead him where he longed to go. But beyond it, surely the path would open. He dreamed that night of ships with lanterns swinging, of sails unfolding like wings, of voices calling orders in languages he did not know. He dreamed of markets filled with spices, of cities with stone walls rising from tropical shores. He dreamed, too, of storms, though even in sleep he could not yet grasp their terror. He saw only the beauty of waves, mountains of water rising and falling, carrying him away. Morning came, and with it the same round of duties. Yet Jan carried himself differently. The gate at the edge of the yard no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a promise waiting to be claimed. A bell rings, hinting at markets beyond the lane. The bell was older than anyone could remember. Hung high in the stone tower at the heart of the village, its voice carried across the fields, pastures, and canals like a steady reminder of time itself. To most, it was only a call, to market, to worship, to the hours marked between dawn and dusk. But to Jan, it was more than bronze struck against iron. It was a summons. Each toll rolled through his chest with the weight of a promise he could almost, but not quite, reach. He first heard it that day while pulling weeds between rows of beets, dirt crusting beneath his fingernails. The sound drifted through the morning air, mingled with the caw of crows and the rustle of leaves. He sat back on his heels, shoulders stiff, and let the vibration settle over him. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, stalls were being opened, carts unloaded, voices rising. He pictured baskets of cheese, bolts of cloth, salt fish drying in the sun, and maybe, if the sailors had been generous or careless, a trinket or two from a distant coast. His father's shout broke the vision. "Jan, mind the row." The boy bent his head again, pulling at roots, though his thoughts wandered as far as the bell carried. That afternoon, when chores were briefly done, Jan walked with his mother to the market. She carried a basket balanced on her hip, a list of what must be bartered tucked in her mind. He carried little more than curiosity. The road into the village was lined with cottages, each with its small garden, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. Children played with sticks in the dust. A dog barked. A woman scrubbed clothes in a tub. All was ordinary, familiar. Yet with each step, the bell's call grew louder, filling him with a nervous thrill. The square was already crowded when they arrived. Stalls leaned against each other, their cloth awnings snapping in the breeze. Merchants shouted prices, hands waved, coins clinked. The air was a jumble of smells: fresh bread, damp wool, fish laid out on boards, onions in sacks. Jan's mother steered them first to the cheese seller, greeting him by name, haggling gently. Jan lingered at the edge, eyes darting. And then he saw it. No more than a scrap, really. A strip of bright cloth, red as flame, draped over the shoulder of a man whose face was browned by sun not found in Holland. He was a sailor, that much was clear. His coat patched, his boots worn, his hair tangled with salt. Yet he carried himself with a swagger that drew glances. The cloth on his shoulder, he boasted to a knot of boys, was silk from the Indies. He let them touch it, laughed at their awe, and moved on with a grin. Jan's breath caught. Here, in this square where he had played as a child, where he had carried eggs to market, was proof that the world stretched farther than cows and canals. The bell tolled again, loud enough to shiver the awnings, and he thought, "It is not calling us to bread and cheese. It is calling us outward. His mother returned, basket heavier now, and nudged him. Don't gape, Jan. Take the onions, he obeyed, but his eyes strayed after the sailor disappearing into the crowd. At another stall, a man sold trinkets laid on a faded cloth, a broken compass, a knife with a bone handle, coins marked with faces not of their prince. Jan crouched low, fingertips hovering above the treasures. The seller caught his eye. 3 coins for the compass, he said, voice low. Jan hesitated. He had coins, hidden in his pocket, saved from odd tasks, but he dared not spend them here. Not yet. Not until he was sure. He shook his head and rose. As the afternoon wore on, the square grew louder, the smell of fish sharper, the press of bodies tighter. Jan's mother bartered for salt, for bread, for a length of wool thread. She spoke with neighbors, exchanged bits of news, frowned at the rising cost of flour. Jan listened with half an ear, his gaze drawn always to the edges of the square, where the road bent toward the harbor. He had never gone so far. His father said there was no need. But today, the pull was stronger. On their walk home, he dared to ask, "Mother, what's beyond the harbor?" She glanced at him, brow furrowed. "Water, of course. Ships. Nothing for you." He pressed further. "And where did the ships go?" She sighed, shifting the basket. "To places with names we don't need. East, west, wherever the merchants send them. Best you keep your mind on fields and fences, John." But her answer only sharpened the edge of longing. He pictured those names unsaid, like jewels hidden in a chest, glowing in the dark. That evening, he slipped outside again, standing by the small gate, staring toward the faint line where the road vanished. He thought he heard the bell again, though surely it had stopped hours before. Perhaps the sound still echoed in his ears. Perhaps it was only the wind playing tricks. Either way, it was enough. The next week brought another market day and another chance. This time he went alone, carrying a basket of eggs. He lingered longer at the trinket stall, this time daring to touch the compass. Its needle quivered, trembling toward north with a life of its own. 6 coins, the seller whispered, eyes narrowing. Jan pulled back. He had the money, but he forced himself to walk away. Better to wait, better to save. Yet the image of the needle stayed with him, trembling toward some unseen place, urging him to follow. By late afternoon, clouds gathered, rain drumming on the awnings, sending merchants scrambling to cover their wares. The square cleared, the bell tolled once more, long and deep. John stood in the rain, basket empty, and felt the water soak through his shirt. It did not matter. He raised his face to the sky and let the sound roll over him. He would not forget. That night, his father noticed the damp of his clothes and scolded him for foolishness. His brothers laughed, telling him he'd catch a chill. His mother shook her head, muttering about daydreams. Jan only smiled faintly, silent. He had heard the bell, seen the compass, touched the silk. No scolding could erase that. Weeks passed, each marked by the tolling. Each time the bell rang, Jan's heart leapt, as though the sound were meant for him alone. He weeded the fields, carried wood, mended harnesses, yet all the while his mind ticked with the bell's rhythm, time passing, chances gathering. One morning, he woke before dawn, lying still in the loft as his brothers snored. He thought of the road, the market, the harbor beyond. He thought of the compass, of the sailor's grin, of the strip of silk red as flame. He whispered to himself, though no one heard. Soon. The bell rang that morning as it always did, but for Jan it sounded less like habit and more like destiny. Farewell lingers in silence more than in words. The decision, when it finally formed, did not come with a shout or a slammed door. It came quietly, like mist gathering over the fields at dawn. Jan had known it for weeks, maybe months, tucked beneath his ribs, swelling a little more each time the bell tolled, each time he glimpsed a sailor swaggering through the market square. Yet now, with the weight of coins in his pocket and the taste of salt almost imagined on the air, he knew the time was near. The morning felt no different. Gray sky, damp earth, a faint drizzle smudging the thatch roofs of the village. But for Jan, every sound was sharper. The scrape of his father's chair on the kitchen floor, the clink of spoons in the porridge, the hiss of the kettle, all seemed to mark a kind of ending. He could hardly swallow, though he forced each bite, cheeks hot with the effort not to tremble. His father said little, as always, though his gaze lingered on Jan longer than usual. His mother fussed with the bread, slicing more than was needed, her hands moving briskly to disguise their shaking. His siblings carried on as though nothing was amiss, though the eldest glanced at him once, then looked away quickly. Perhaps they all knew, in some wordless way, what was about to happen. After the meal, Jan stepped outside. The drizzle had grown into a soft rain, soaking the yard, dampening the wood of the small gate. He leaned against it, hand resting on the worn top rail. Beyond the hedges, the lane waited, dark with mud, leading first to the village and then to the harbor. His chest ached with the weight of the choice. The farewell itself was awkward, made of half gestures and unfinished sentences. His mother followed him to the doorway, apron damp at the hem, eyes shining with something she would not let fall. She lifted her hand as if to touch his face, but stopped, fingers curling back into her palm. Instead, she pressed a folded cloth into his hand, bread wrapped for the road. "Eat when you're hungry," she said, her voice steady though her throat moved with the effort. His father remained seated by the hearth, knife in hand, whittling at a piece of wood. He did not rise, did not speak, until John's shadow filled the doorway. Then, without looking up, he said, "The sea doesn't care for boys' dreams. It will test you, and if you fail, it will not grieve." His words were harsh, but beneath them lay something softer, a warning shaped like love, though too stern to be named. Jan swallowed hard. "I'll come back," he murmured, though whether to convince himself or his father, he did not know. The old man's knife paused. His shoulders shifted, but he did not turn. Only after a moment did he mutter, "Go on then." And so John stepped out into the rain. His brothers stood by the barn, feigning work, though their eyes followed him. The youngest kicked at a stone, scowling, unwilling to say goodbye. The eldest gave the smallest of nods, emotion so slight it could have been mistaken for nothing at all. His sister clutched the doorframe, lips pressed tight, her braid dark with rain. No one called after him. No one asked him to stay. The silence was the farewell. The road felt different beneath his boots, though it was the same lane he had walked countless times with baskets of eggs or bundles of kindling. Today, each step pressed into the mud as though marking a boundary he could not return across. The rain grew heavier, soaking his hair, plastering his shirt to his back. He did not hurry. Let the storm come, he thought. The sea would hold worse. By the time he reached the village, the market stalls were already open. The bell had tolled, its echo still humming in the mist. Merchants called prices. Women bargained. Children darted through puddles. It was ordinary, but for Jan it was charged with energy, as though the whole square leaned forward, waiting. At the edge of the market, near the road that bent toward the harbor, stood a figure he had noticed before. A man with a feathered hat, coat worn at the cuffs, but posture that commanded attention. He was a recruiter, everyone knew, one of those who lured farm boys into the service of the company. Parents muttered against him, warned their sons to steer clear. But John's feet carried him closer. The man's eyes lit with recognition. "Looking to earn more than mud and milk?" he asked, voice low, smooth as oil. John hesitated, clutching the bread his mother had given him. Then he nodded. The recruiter smiled, teeth bright against the drizzle. "There's a berth open." Strong hands needed. Pays small, but the world's wide. He pressed a paper into Jan's hand, though the boy could hardly read. The letters blurred in the rain, but the seal at the bottom was enough. The company's mark. By evening, the choice was sealed. Jan's name was written, his place claimed. The ship would leave within days. He returned only once more to the farm, walking the lane with heavier steps. His family was gathered in the yard. The rain finally cleared. His mother wiped her hands on her apron. His father leaned against the barn door. His siblings clustered together. No words were spoken. He simply lifted his hand, a gesture half wave, half salute. His mother's eyes brimmed again, but she did not move. His father inclined his head, a motion so small it might have been imagined. And then the moment passed. John turned away, the sound of the bell faint in the distance, the road stretching ahead. That night, lying in a stranger's loft in the village, he dreamed of the gate. He saw it swinging slowly in the wind, creaking softly, no one there to latch it. The farm stood quiet behind it, smoke rising from the chimney, windows glowing. But the gate faced the road, and the road led outward. When he woke, the decision held. The farewell was done. The harbor smells stir both awe and unease. The road from the village sloped downward, following the sluggish canal as it widened toward the sea. Jan had walked it many times before, carrying eggs or firewood to market, but never had he gone all the way. His father had always said there was no reason. Everything needed could be bought in the square. Yet now, with the recruiter's paper folded carefully in his pocket and his small bundle of clothes slung over one shoulder, he walked with new purpose. Each step felt as though it pressed him farther from the farm and deeper into something unknown. The first sign of the harbor was sound, a chorus of gulls shrieking, their wings flashing white against the gray sky. Then came the smell, salt heavy on the wind, mingled with tar, fish, and the faint, sour reek of refuse thrown from ships. Finally, the masts appeared, rising like a forest stripped bare of branches, ropes and spars weaving together in a tangle that blotted out half the horizon. Jan stopped at the edge of the quay, heart hammering. He had imagined ships before, of course, drawn them in the dust with a stick, listened to sailors boast in the market. But imagination had been a pale shadow. The reality towered above him. The vessel that bore the company's crest was larger than anything he had thought possible. Its hull, black with tar, loomed like a wall of wood, curving upward until it seemed to scrape the sky. Carved figures adorned the stern, weather-worn but still proud. On deck, men moved briskly, hauling ropes, shouting orders, their voices whipped away by the wind. Sails hung furled, but even folded they looked vast, heavy with the promise of flight. Jan stood rooted, his bundle clutched tightly, his throat dry. A boy of the fields, he thought. What business had he here among giants? Yet he could not turn back. The bell of the village had called him this far. and the sea itself seemed now to whisper his name. A voice broke his trance. "First time, lad?" A man in a tarred coat stood nearby, face weathered, hair streaked with gray. His eyes crinkled with something between amusement and pity. Jan swallowed and nodded. "Don't gape too long," the man said. "She looks big, but wait till you see the ocean. Then you'll know small." He spat neatly into the water and shouldered past, heading up the gangplank with the easy stride of one long accustomed to decks that moved. The recruiter was waiting, perched on a crate, quill in hand. He checked Jan's name against a list, then jerked his head toward the gangway. "Up you go. Find the mate. He'll set you to work." Jan climbed, boots thudding on the planks, legs trembling with more than exertion. At the top, the deck opened wide, boards slick with salt spray, ropes coiled in neat piles, cannon glinting dark along the rails. The air vibrated with activity, men swarming the rigging, carpenters hammering, barrels rolled into place. The noise was unlike anything he had known, louder even than a crowded market, yet ordered, purposeful. "Move along!" A mate's voice cracked like a whip, and John stumbled aside as a group of sailors lugged a heavy chest past him. He pressed himself against the rail, the sea slapping below, and tried not to look down. His stomach fluttered. Below deck, he found the quarters where new hands were stowed. The ceiling pressed low, the air thick with damp and the tang of old sweat. Hammocks hung in rows, narrow strips of canvas swaying gently. Jan touched one, testing, and wondered how a man was meant to sleep without rolling onto the floor. He dropped his bundle into a space barely large enough for him to stand. This would be his world now, he realized. Dark wood, close air, strangers breathing in unison. That first night was restless. He lay in the hammock, listening to the groan of timbers, the scurry of unseen rats, the coughs of other boys. The air seemed to press down on him, heavy as wet wool. He thought of the loft at home, of the gate creaking in the wind, of his mother's quiet eyes. A lump rose in his throat, and he clenched his fists, ashamed. He had chosen this. There was no turning back. At dawn, a bell clanged above, harsh and metallic. The hammocks emptied in a rush, men stumbling to their feet. Orders rang out. Jan followed blindly, half-dazed, up into the light. The deck gleamed wet, the wind sharp with salt. He was handed a coil of rope, its fibers rough against his palms, and told to haul. He did not know the words shouted, but he pulled when the others pulled, straining until his arms burned. Hours passed. His muscles screamed, his back ached, yet something in him thrilled at the rhythm. The ship was alive, he thought, and every hand was part of its body. His palms blistered, his shoulders stiffened, but he gritted his teeth and kept on. By evening, the harbor had grown quiet. The ship was provisioned, her crew assembled. Jan stood at the rail, gazing at the town shrinking into dusk. Lanterns winked along the quay. Fishermen's fires smoked in the distance. Somewhere beyond, hidden in the mist, the farm waited. He wondered if anyone stood at the gate, listening for him. The captain came on deck then, a stern figure with a trimmed beard, coat buttoned to the throat. He paced slowly, eyes sharp, and the crew straightened. His presence was like iron hammered into shape, cold, hard, unbending. He glanced at Jan only once, and in that glance the boy felt weighed, measured, and filed away as one more expendable hand. Night fell, and the ship rocked gently against the pier. Jan climbed back down to the dark quarters, his body aching, his heart full. He had left the farm, left the gate, left silence behind. Before him stretched oceans he had never seen, storms he could not yet imagine, and dangers he did not understand. But he was here, aboard the great vessel, part of her now. As he drifted toward sleep, the ship creaked and sighed, as though speaking in a tongue older than bells or markets. It was not comforting, but it was steady, and he let its rhythm carry him away. The sea teaches gently with sway and rope-burned hands. The harbor disappeared behind them in a haze of smoke and gull cries. At first the ship crept, sails unfurling in cautious stages, the wind tugging with hesitant fingers. But once clear of the quay, the canvas spread wide, bellies swelling, and the vessel surged forward with a grace that startled Jan. He had walked, he had run, he had ridden wagons that jolted across fields, but nothing had prepared him for this sudden, smooth momentum, as though the world itself shifted beneath his feet. The first lesson came quick. The sea does not coddle. Within hours, John's stomach lurched. The horizon tipped and slid, the deck swayed like a restless cradle, and the boy's head spun with every roll. He clung to the rail, eyes watering, and emptied what little food he had eaten into the frothing wake. Around him, sailors laughed, not cruelly, but with the weary humor of men who had seen the same spectacle 100 times before. "Welcome to Neptune's table," one said, clapping his back so hard Jan nearly toppled into the sea. For days the sickness clung. Bread tasted of sawdust, water of metal. Even lying in his hammock, Jan felt the earth tilt and dip beneath him, though there was no earth anymore, only this endless, moving floor. He learned to dread the smell of salted pork, the reek of tar, the sour stench of bilge water rising from below. His hands blistered from hauling lines, skin split and raw, rope fibers embedding like needles. Each task seemed meant to undo him, yet the work would not wait. Orders rang out, the mates' voices harsh, and Jan obeyed as best he could, stumbling, fumbling, skinning his shins on the rigging. When he faltered, a boot nudged him forward. When he fell, a calloused hand dragged him up. He discovered quickly that weakness was not tolerated, but neither was it mocked beyond measure. Every man had once been new. Every man had spilled his stomach over the rail. Every man had felt the bite of rope before the skin toughened. At night, the quarters filled with the chorus of snores, coughs, and mutters. Jan lay in his hammock, listening to the groan of timbers and the hiss of water against the hull. The ship seemed alive, restless, never still. Rats skittered across beams, their claws scratching, their bodies bold enough to nose at crumbs. Once, half dreaming, Jan thought he heard them whisper in Dutch, tiny voices mocking him. He laughed weakly at himself when morning came, though unease lingered. One evening, as he sat on deck trying to eat a crust of bread that tasted faintly of mildew, an older sailor named Peter settled beside him. His beard was salted with gray, his hands scarred, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "You'll live," he said simply, tearing his own bread in half and handing it over. "Most do, if they keep their feet and their wits. The sea's a hard master, but she teaches quick." Jan chewed slowly, grateful, and dared to ask, "What's the first lesson?" Peter gazed out at the rolling waves, their crests tipped with fading light. "That you're small. Smaller than you ever thought, and that you'll never win by fighting her. Best you learn to bend." He slapped John's shoulder and rose, heading toward the rigging. John sat a long while, the words turning over in his mind like pebbles smoothed by tide. The days blurred into one another, pull, haul, coil, scrub. His palms hardened, the blisters forming calluses. The sickness ebbed, though it returned when storms gathered. Slowly, he found his balance. He could walk the swaying deck without clinging to ropes. could climb the rigging without his knees locking in fear. He learned to tie knots that held fast, to listen for the change in wind, to move in rhythm with the roll of the ship rather than against it. Still, there were humiliations. Once, told to furl a sail, he fumbled the canvas so badly that the mate cuffed him on the ear. The sting burned, but worse was the laughter of the crew. Another time, he tripped carrying a bucket of pitch and spilled it across the deck. It took hours to scrape clean, his knees aching from kneeling, his face hot with shame. But there were small triumphs too. The first time he managed to haul a line without stumbling, Peter gave him a nod that felt like a medal. The first time he scrambled aloft and looked down from the yardarm, heart hammering, he realized he was not trembling. The sea stretched in every direction, gray and endless, but instead of fear, he felt a thrill, as if the horizon itself had opened for him. One night, standing watch beneath a sky littered with stars, he heard the bosun humming an old tune. The melody was low, mournful, yet oddly comforting. Jan found himself humming along, the sound blending with the creak of ropes and the sigh of the wind. For the first time since leaving the farm, he felt part of something larger than himself, something older than any bell or gate. Yet the sea was not finished with her lessons. A squall struck suddenly, wind howling, rain lashing like whips. The deck pitched violently, waves crashing over the rail. Jan was thrown hard against a spar, breath knocked from him. Hands grabbed, ropes lashed, men shouted. He fought panic, forcing his body to move, to haul, to cling. Hours blurred into a roar of wind and water. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the ship battered but afloat. Jan's arms shook, his body bruised, but he was still there. Peter found him slumped by the rail, soaked to the bone. "Second lesson," the older sailor said, voice hoarse. "The sea doesn't care. Storm or calm, she'll do as she pleases. You do your part, and pray that's enough." Jan nodded, too exhausted to reply. He understood, though. He was learning. That night, back in his hammock, he lay awake, every muscle aching, yet his heart strangely steady. The farm felt far away, a dream blurred by distance. Here was reality, the sway, the creak, the endless gray horizon, and within it, a rhythm that might, in time, become as natural as breathing. Darkness below deck holds both laughter and unease. Below deck was a world apart, a place where the light of day never quite reached. The first time Jan climbed down the narrow ladder, clutching the damp rail, the smell hit him like a wave. Sweat, tar, mold, and something sharper. Unwashed bodies pressed close in air that had nowhere to go. The timbers groaned overhead. Voices rose and fell. Hammocks creaked with each shift of weight. It was here, more than on deck, that the sea revealed her price. The hammocks were slung in tight rows, canvas strips swaying inches from one another. When Jan lay down, his shoulder brushed the body beside him. His knees nearly touched the man across the way. Privacy did not exist. A cough spread like fire through the air, a sneeze answered by groans, a laugh cutting the dark before it was swallowed again. Rats scurried boldly along beams, their eyes glinting, their claws tapping like tiny drumbeats. At first, Jan could not sleep. The air was thick, pressing against his chest, and every sound startled him awake. He listened to the snores, the mutters, the rustle of men turning. He thought of the loft at home, where his brother's breathing had been familiar, comforting. Here the breaths were foreign, rough, some rattling with illness, some hitching with dreams. He closed his eyes, but images crowded. Waves crashing, the compass needle trembling, his father's stern face, Then came laughter. Rough at first, then easing, weaving through the darkness. A story told in a low voice, punctuated by chuckles. Jan strained to listen. The tale was crude, about a tavern girl and a drunken sailor. But the laughter warmed the space, turning fear into something shared. For the first time since boarding, Jan felt the tension in his chest ease. He let the voices carry him, like a lullaby not meant for him, but offered all the same. Days below were worse. When storms lashed the deck, men were driven down into the quarters, huddled together, hammocks swinging wildly. Buckets tipped, slops spilled, men vomited where they lay. The air thickened until it seemed unbreathable. Jan fought nausea, pressing his face into the canvas of his hammock, willing himself not to yield. Others groaned, cursed, prayed. One man fell from his hammock and lay groaning on the boards, too sick to climb back up. No one moved to help. They could barely help themselves. Amid the misery, small acts shone like lanterns. Peter, steady as always, passed a crust of bread to a boy too weak to rise. The carpenter's mate told a joke about nails that made no sense but earned tired chuckles. Someone began humming an old psalm, off-key but steady, and voices joined until the whole room vibrated with sound, part prayer, part defiance. One evening, when the storm had passed and the men were calmer, Jan found himself drawn into their circle. Cornelis, a broad man with a scarred cheek, leaned close and asked, "So, farm boy, what brought you here? Chasing gold? Women? Or just too restless for cows?" His grin was sharp, but not unkind. Jan hesitated, then admitted, "The bell. The harbor. I wanted to see what lay beyond." Cornelis barked a laugh. "A bell, eh? Most of us were driven here by hunger or the law. You're the first to blame a church tower." The men laughed and Jan flushed, but the sound was not cruel. It folded him in, made him part of them. Later that night, as the lanterns guttered low, Cornelis leaned over. "Careful, boy. The sea takes more than she gives. Don't let her steal your sleep, too." His words lingered, heavy as Jan turned in his hammock. Sleep, when it came, was broken. He dreamed of the rats again, their claws scraping, their voices whispering in Dutch, telling him secrets he did not want to know. He woke with a start, breath ragged, sweat cooling on his skin. Around him, the men snored on, unaware. He pressed his palms against his eyes, whispering to himself that it was only fever, only imagination. Yet the unease clung like damp. In the days that followed, he learned more of life below. The water barrels, once sweet, grew stale, tinged with slime. Bread turned hard, crawling with weevils. At first he picked them out, grimacing, but soon he ate without pause. Hunger dulled disgust. He listened to the older men grumble about salt horse, meat so tough it could break teeth. He gnawed in silence, reminding himself that he had chosen this path. But not all was hardship. Sometimes, after the day's work, men gathered in loose groups to share stories. Tales of storms survived, ports visited, women courted and lost. John listened wide-eyed, drinking in every word. Some stories were boast, some lie, some truth too harsh to name. Yet together, they formed a tapestry of life at sea, brutal, strange, and alive. Once, Peter told of a voyage where the mast had snapped in a gale, the crew clinging to wreckage for days. His voice was calm, almost gentle, as though speaking of a neighbor's harvest rather than a brush with death. "You don't fight the sea," he said again. "You bend. You endure. That's how you come back." John carried those words with him, repeating them in the dark when fear rose. Weeks passed. The routine carved itself into him. Work above in the wind, then back below into the press of bodies, the swing of hammocks, the scuttle of rats. He grew leaner, tougher, his hands rough as rope, his eyes shadowed. And yet, within the darkness, he found moments of light. A shared laugh, a song hummed low, the warmth of another's shoulder brushing his in the crowded sleep. One night, when the lantern burned low and the ship creaked softly, John finally slept deeply. He dreamed not of rats or storms, but of the gate at home, swinging gently in the wind. He saw his mother's face, calm and steady, her hand raised as though in blessing. The dream carried him through until dawn, when the bell above called him back to labor. Storm winds remind them of their smallness at sea. The warning came first as a hush. For days the sky had hung low and gray, a dull woolen blanket spread over the horizon. The wind shifted, restless, tugging at the rigging in quick, uncertain gusts. Old sailors muttered to one another, glancing upward as though the clouds spoke a language only they could hear. The boatswain's pace quickened, his voice sharper, and men worked with a nervous energy, securing lines, checking knots twice. Jan sensed it too, not in knowledge but in the pit of his stomach, a tightening that would not ease. The sea, usually a restless but steady companion, had grown twitchy. The swell rose higher, the deck tilting more with each roll. Barrels groaned in the hold, ropes creaked, and the air seemed charged, as if it waited. By evening, the hush broke. The wind howled suddenly, tearing through the sails with a sound like a scream. Rain slashed sideways, sharp as nails, stinging Jan's face. The deck bucked beneath his feet, sending him sprawling. Shouts rang out, orders lost in the roar. Lanterns swung wildly, their light smearing across wet wood. "Haul, boy." Peter's voice cut through, rough and urgent. Jan scrambled up, clutching the line thrust into his hands. His palms burned as the rope ripped across them, the fibers biting deep. He pulled with all his strength, shoulders screaming, the storm yanking back as if mocking his effort. Around him, men strained, faces set grim, water streaming down their cheeks. Lightning split the sky, white fire carving shadows sharper than day. For a heartbeat, the ship stood revealed, sails half furled, men clinging to rigging like ants on a branch, waves rising higher than houses. Then darkness slammed back, thunder rolling so loud Jan's chest shook. The sea was no longer a surface but a mountain range, peaks and valleys shifting with cruel speed. One moment the deck pitched skyward, hurling him against the rail. The next, it dropped away beneath his feet, leaving his stomach behind. Salt spray blinded him, filled his mouth, choked his throat. He coughed, gagged, pulled again at the line, every muscle burning. Fear should have undone him. It nearly did. But amid the terror, Jan felt a strange clarity. The storm did not hate him. It did not even notice him. He was as small as a fleck of foam on the wave's back, and that knowledge steadied him. To fight would be useless. To endure was all. Hours blurred. The storm raged, relentless, and the men raged back with ropes, sails, buckets. A spar cracked with a sound like gunfire, splinters flying, one piece striking a sailor across the shoulder. He fell with a cry, swallowed almost at once by darkness and spray. The men shouted, but there was no saving him. Jan's stomach clenched, yet he kept hauling, the rope carving deeper into his skin. There was no pause, no mercy. Sometime near dawn, the fury eased. The wind still tore, but less savagely. Rain thinned to sheets, then to a steady patter. The ship sagged, battered, sails ragged, but afloat. Men slumped against rails, their faces gray, hands raw, bodies trembling. Jan collapsed beside Peter, chest heaving, too spent to move. Peter spat seawater and gave a crooked grin. "Third lesson, boy," he rasped. "Storms don't last, but they'll take as many as they please before they pass." His eyes, red-rimmed but steady, met Jan's, and they don't give them back. Jan nodded, throat tight, images seared into him. The man swept away, the spar snapping, the lightning etching death in the sky. Yet he also carried something else. The fact that he had stood, had hauled, had not broken. He was small, yes, but he had endured. When the sun rose weakly behind tattered clouds, the deck lay strewn with wreckage. Sails hung torn, ropes trailed loose, the wood scarred and splintered. Men moved slowly, clearing, mending, patching. No one spoke of the lost sailor. There was no time. Grief was a luxury the sea rarely allowed. Jan worked with numb hands, his body stiff, but his heart carried a quiet weight. The storm had stripped him bare and left him standing. That night, the ship rocked more gently, though the air still smelled of rain and salt. In his hammock, Jan felt the bruises on his arms, the cuts on his palms, the ache in his bones. Yet he also felt something new, a thread of belonging woven tighter by the storm. He closed his eyes, listening to the creak of timbers, the slow drip of water from above, and let exhaustion pull him under. In his dreams, he saw again the lightning, the mountain waves, the endless black. But this time he stood steadier, the rope in his hands not burning but holding, the ship not enemy but teacher. A low fever turns night into a longer sea. The storm left a hush in its wake, the sort of quiet that felt earned. Sails were patched with neat stitches, ropes coiled back into order, and the deck took on the steady, rocked breathing of a creature that had fought hard and now meant to rest. Men moved slowly, voices low, as if sound itself needed mending. Jan worked among them, hands awkward and sore, eyes gritty with the kind of weariness that sits behind the bones. He thought only of sleep, of his hammock swaying in the dark like a cradle, but the sea keeps its own ledger. By late afternoon, the wind grew warm, and the air in the quarters thickened. The water from the casks tasted woolly and faintly sweet, too long in wood. Bread broke into hard, dusty islands, and the salt meat seemed to stare back, its sheen unpleasant in the lamplight. Jan found his throat tight. He swallowed a little, then set the bowl aside. It was nothing, he told himself, only the ache after a storm. By the next watch, a heat had gathered beneath his skin. Not the warm glow of hard work, but a cramped warmth, as if someone had left a small lantern burning inside his ribs. He shivered, though sweat clung along his neck. When he bent to lift a bucket, the deck tilted further than it should have. When he straightened, the masts looked taller than he remembered. The mate told him to fetch pitch. He nodded and went, only to realize on the ladder that he had forgotten where pitch was kept. He stood for a breath too long, then marched himself forward, embarrassed by the small lapse, by the way the world shifted at the edges. Peter noticed first. He had a way of seeing without making a fuss, and when Jan passed him, the older sailor reached out and touched the back of his wrist. "You're warm," he said, no judgment in the words. "Eat something." "I'm fine," Jan lied. His teeth chattered despite the warmth. "Fine goes to fever if you're not careful." Peter tipped his head toward the companionway. "Go show your tongue to Jan's." They called the surgeon by his surname, the way they might refer to a spar or the mainmast, necessary and consequential. Dr. Jans was a thin man with linen sleeves always rolled back, hands clean even when nothing else on the ship could claim such a thing. He kept his tools in a chest that clicked shut at night, a sound that carried farther than it should in the gloom. When Jan edged toward the little corner marked off as a sick bay, a few extra crates, a shelf, a slung lantern, Jan's was washing a cloth in a basin, his face thoughtful, eyes clear. "You," the surgeon said, not unkindly. "Sit." He pressed cool fingers to Jan's temples, then drew down the lower lid of one eye with a gentleness that surprised Jan. "How long?" "Since this morning," Jan said, though he was not confident of the time. It had both crept and leapt all day. Jan's nodded once. He set a cup in Jan's hands. The liquid inside smelled sharp, like old apples and iron. "Vinegar tea," the surgeon said, "and water. More than you want. Small sips. Keep it down if you can. Bread softened in it will sit better." He tipped Jan's chin lightly, looking at his gums. A little tenderness. Not much. We'll see to that when we can. Jan sipped, the sourness shocking, and then strangely welcome. Jans folded a damp cloth and laid it across Jan's forehead. "Sleep when you may. Breathe. If you dream, let it pass through. Don't argue with it." He said it the way a man gives directions at a crossroads. Jan meant to return to work. He told himself he would sit for a moment only, then stand. But the fever's lantern brightened, and the bench beneath him lengthened into a pier, and the surgeon's corner became, for a stretch of moments, a low room with a straw mattress beneath a familiar loft. He smelled hay when there was none, and the ship's sway became the breath of the rafters. Somewhere in the dream, his father sat by the hearth sharpening a knife, the rasping sound merging with the hum of rigging until they were the same note. It would have been frightening if it had been sharper. Instead, the fever softened the edges so that nothing hurt exactly. It only grew strangely grand. He saw the market bell as wide as the sky, its mouth opening to make a sound that came out as the ship's bell, calling watch on and watch off, hours folding into one another like tidy sheets. He saw the small gate at the farm turning on its hinges, not with weather, but with tide, opening as the ship rolled, then closing with each gentle fall. Now and then, the rat scratch came, a tiny sound on wood close to his ear. Twice he felt whiskers near his knuckles and drifted toward wakefulness in a start. Both times, a nearby hand shooed the creature away before his eyes were fully open. The second time, he recognized Cornelis's rough laugh. "Even rats know a soft touch when they feel one," the big sailor muttered. "Here, try this." He slid something beneath Jan's palm, a wedge of onion, sharp and clean. "Stole it off the cook with a look I learned in Lisbon," Cornelis said, sounding pleased with himself. "Eat what you can. Don't argue with your stomach either." Jan chewed, eyes closed, tears springing from the onion's bite more than from the fever. The sting cut through the wool in his head. He swallowed, slowly, carefully, and the small success steadied him. Night came. The lantern above the surgeon's shelf swung in a slow circle, light crawling along the curve of the hull and back. The air below deck took on a cotton-thick stillness between snores and coughs. From somewhere near the bow, a low song rose. No words, only a melody that reached back farther than any single man. It carried like a rope is passed hand to hand. Jan let it loop around him. He drifted to the inside of his fever and watched the light move like a moon across planks. Not everyone slept. A boy near Jan's age lay a few feet away, his skin drawn tight, eyes too bright. Adrian, someone had called him in passing. He'd been strong on deck, quick with a line, but now he breathed shallow and fast, heat rolling off him in waves. Jans came and went, measured as a clock, checking pulses, counting breaths beneath his own. He left a damp cloth, took it away, brought it back, cooled. He coaxed a spoon of broth past cracked lips and did not sigh when most of it came back. He simply wiped the boy's mouth and tried again later, as if patience itself were a remedy. Toward midnight, the ship took a long, slow roll, and the hammocks lifted and settled like a field in wind. Jan felt very small and very safe at once, like a child in a wagon watching hedges go by. He thought of the bell, then of the compass he'd not bought, then of the cloth the sailor had draped like fire, all of it threaded through, none of it hurt. He slept. Morning was cool and gray. Sweat lay on his skin and then cooled, and in that cooling the small lantern inside went out. His head felt hollowed, as if someone had swept it, and his arms trembled when he sat up. But the world steadied. Jans pressed a hand to his shoulder before he could stand. "Not yet," the surgeon said, and the firm sureness in his voice kept Jan from arguing. "Sip, then sit, then stand." He pointed at the steps with his chin. "And when you can, take a little air. Quietly. There's sun beyond the cloud if you squint." Jan obeyed. He ate bread softened in vinegar water and felt it sit. The space around him sharpened, not harshly, but like fog thinning. He could see where the planks darkened from old leaks, where a knot in the wood looked like an eye, where someone had scratched a date with the point of a knife. He counted his breaths. On the 5th, the rat scratch came again, and he reached to nudge the small body away. It scampered, offended, the tiny sound of its feet fading into the bigger creaks of the hull. When he could stand, he did, bracing against the bulkhead, then took the ladder one slow rung at a time. The air on deck lifted him like a hand beneath his chin. A flat wash of light stretched from horizon to horizon. No drama, no storm, only the far-off promise of a change. A few men stood with their faces tipped up. The boatswain allowed it for a moment, then sent them back to coils and canvas with a grunt that was as close to kindness as a boatswain affords. Peter appeared at Jan's side, as if the deck had been built specifically to bring him there. "Better?" he asked. "Better," Jan said, and surprised himself by meaning it. "That's the 4th lesson," Peter said, watching a bird skim low to take something invisible from the surface. "Your body's a small lamp. You tend it when you can. When you can't, someone else holds it for you. Then it's your turn again." A shout at the stern turned them both. Men had gathered in quiet formation. No alarm. None was needed. Jans came up with 2 others bearing a canvas shape light as shame and heavy as stone. Adrian's fever had gone somewhere the ship could not follow. There were no speeches beyond the necessary words. A page of prayer read in a voice that did not waver, a brief pause that belonged not to the man, but to every man looking on. The canvas slid, the sea received, the wake closed like a careful seam. The gulls did not come. It was better that way. Jan stood very straight and kept his eyes on the horizon. The world did not stop. It scarcely slowed. The rope still needed hauling. The pitch still needed warming. The buckets still knocked their quiet coat against the rail. But for a long while, the soft hollow in his chest would not fill, and he did not ask it to. He let it be. Jans touched his shoulder once as he passed back toward the ladder. "You're back on your feet," he said. "Keep them under you." The surgeon's mouth twitched, a private smile almost, but the rest of his face remained professional, a man bracing himself against a responsibility that never ended. Work returned like tide, not summoned, simply there. Jan's hands remembered the feel of rope, and the rope remembered him. By afternoon, he could carry a bucket without his knees threatening to fold, and by evening, the taste of onion and vinegar had become, if not pleasant, at least trustworthy. He watched the sun slip through a seam in the cloud and lay a pale road on the water. It was a road that led everywhere and nowhere. He let his eyes follow it until it faded. Below, after the mess, the men sat quieter than usual. Cornelis told a story, but it was a gentle one, only half a joke, about a tin cup that rolled the length of a deck in a calm so long they had to name it to fill the time. Someone hummed the psalm again. Someone else sharpened a knife very slowly, careful not to nick the blade. The lantern rocked its soft orbit over them. Jan lay back in his hammock and watched light and shadow exchange places on the beams. The fever had left him emptied in a useful way, like a pail rinsed clean. He could feel where fear used to clatter and found instead a quiet space large enough to hold both sailor and farm boy, storm and gate, loss and air. The ship creaked, an old, companionable sound. The rat scratch came once and then did not come again. He smiled without opening his eyes. He thought briefly of writing to his mother to tell her of the surgeon with patient hands, of the man named Adrian, whose breath had gone out like a candle, of the onion wedge that tasted like clarity, of Peter's talk of lamps. But there was no paper at hand, and the words would have broken differently on land. He stored them instead, as sailors store small coins, close, precious, to be turned over quietly on nights when the sea was kind. Overhead, the deck thumped with the tread of feet, setting the ship to its long, regular breathing for the night. Jan's hammock swayed. He exhaled, then inhaled, slowly, like a man taking the measure of a new room. Out beyond the planks, beyond the sour casks and the tar, the ocean stretched calm as a made bed. That would change, he knew. The ledger was never closed. But for now the ink dried, and the page was allowed to rest. He slept with the ease of someone who has been ill, and is not ill now. The fever's lantern was out. Another would be lit somewhere else, tended by other hands. The ship moved forward, not fast, not slow, only as a ship must, under a sky that had remembered how to be ordinary. Calm seas reveal rhythms more than they promise rest. The fever burned itself out of the ship as suddenly as it had come. For days, men had groaned in hammocks, sweat pooling on rough canvas, their eyes rolling white in lantern glow. Then, little by little, color returned to faces, steps steadied on the deck, and laughter edged back into the talk. There were still gaps, a bunk left empty, a plate not claimed, but the vessel breathed easier, like lungs cleared after a long cough. The ocean seemed to agree. The storm clouds drifted east, leaving skies pale and high. The water took on a long, slow rhythm, swells like breathing. Even the gulls returned, riding the air with lazy cries. John stood at the rail, the salt spray softer now, and let himself believe the sea could be gentle. His hands were calloused, his back sore, but he found a strange comfort in the ache. Work had carved him into something new, and the shape almost fit. The calm brought routine. Each day began with the clang of the bell, the shuffle of bare feet on planks, the mate's bark. Lines had to be coiled, decks scrubbed with holystones until the wood shone pale. Jan learned the rhythm of hauling. Pull, brace, breathe, release. He learned to read the sky, to watch the set of clouds, the color of water near the horizon. He was not yet skilled, but he was no longer lost. Below deck, the quarters were still cramped, still thick with smell, but less oppressive now that men coughed less and sang more. A dice game appeared one evening, bones clicking softly on a barrel lid. Cornelis told a new story every night, his voice deep and rolling, carrying men away from the press of wood and sweat into taverns and markets they might never see again. Jan listened, not always believing, but always entertained. He found himself leaning on Peter more often, not just for guidance, but for company. The older sailor had a way of speaking that steadied the mind, as though he could cut rope with words when knots grew too tight. One evening, as the sun bled red into the waves, Jan asked him quietly, "When does it stop feeling strange?" Peter squinted at the horizon, considering. "Never," he said at last. "But strange becomes familiar, and familiar becomes home. That's the trick of it. You'll never own the sea, boy. But you might belong to it." John carried the words into sleep, letting them settle like ballast. Days stretched into weeks. The ship crept farther from anything Jan had known, farther from bells and gates, deeper into the endless. The constellations overhead shifted, new stars blinking awake while old ones sank. Jan traced them with his eyes during night watch, learning the names the sailors muttered. Some from scripture, some from taverns, some invented on the spot. He began to see how the sky was a map, though he could not yet read it fully. Work filled the hours. The carpenter's mate set him to splicing rope until his fingers remembered the motions without thought. The bosun had him tar the rigging, the sticky black coating clinging stubbornly to skin. He grew used to the sting of salt in cuts, the ache of shoulders after climbing aloft. Each task seemed endless, yet each day ended, and each morning began again. But beneath the calm, unease lingered. A sudden shout on deck could freeze the heart until it proved only a loose line. A cough in the dark could summon the memory of fever. The sea was never truly safe, and Jan felt that truth like a shadow at his shoulder. One afternoon, while the air hung heavy and still, Cornelis leaned beside him at the rail. "This is when she's worst," the big sailor said, eyes scanning the horizon. "She?" Jan asked. "The sea. When she looks calm. Storms you can see, pirates you can fight, but calm hides rot, sickness, thirst, despair. A man can drown slower in still water than in waves." He spat overboard, eyes narrowing. "Keep busy. Don't let her lull you." Jan nodded, shivering though the air was warm. He returned to work with a new intensity, grateful for the rope in his hands, the sail in need of patching. Better sweat than silence. Evenings softened the edge of worry. Music crept into the air. A fiddle pulled from someone's chest, its wood worn but still sweet. Men hummed along, tapping boots, the rhythm of home carried across boards thousands of miles from shore. Jan closed his eyes and let the notes carry him. For a moment, he was not at sea, not in danger, but simply part of a circle of voices chasing the same tune. In quieter moments, his thoughts returned to the farm. He saw the gate swinging, heard the bell, smelled the earth after rain. But the images felt dimmer now, as though distance had thinned them. He wondered if his mother still looked for him, if his father still sharpened tools by the fire. The ache was there, but less sharp, dulled by distance, by the press of days. Then, without warning, a shout cut across the calm. "Sail!" Men rushed to the rail, eyes straining. On the horizon, a white triangle pricked the sky. Another, then a third. The mate barked. Orders. The crew scrambled. Cannons readied. Jan's heart hammered, the calm shattering in an instant. But as the ships drew closer, their outlines proved different. Small traders, no threat to a company vessel. The crew laughed, relief bubbling out. Jan sagged against the rail, realizing how close fear sat beneath the surface. The days slid back into their rhythm. Work, watch, eat, sleep. Yet Jan knew now that calm was only another mask. Danger did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, hidden in still water, in a cough, in a shadow at the edge of vision. Still, he endured. His hands grew stronger, his back straighter. He learned when to speak and when to keep silent. He found, in the swing of a hammock and the creak of timbers, a kind of lullaby. The sea had not spared him, but she had not yet taken him. That was enough. As night fell, the stars spread bright across the dome of sky, more than Jan had ever imagined. He lay in his hammock, listening to the ship breathe, and let the calm settle in. It was fragile, yes, but it was his. Order below deck keeps chaos from breaking free. The sea stayed kind through the next stretch of weeks, the ship sliding over swells as smooth as a hand over linen. No storms cracked the sky, no sudden fever gripped the hammocks. The calm, when it came, held steady. And yet, within that steadiness, another kind of tension gathered. Men were not built for endless repetition, Jan learned. Work without change carved restlessness into the bones. The bosun, a wiry man with a voice sharp as flint, knew it. He cracked order across the decks like a whip, not cruel for cruelty's sake, but because he knew what waited if men went slack. He had seen it before, in other voyages, laziness becoming quarrel, quarrel becoming fight, fight becoming mutiny. A ship on calm seas could rot faster than one in storm, so he kept them moving. Coil that line again, he snapped one morning, catching Jan's work with a glance. Neat boy. A tangle now as a noose later, Jan bit back a reply. His arms ached from hauling, his back from scrubbing the deck on hands and knees until it gleamed. But he unwound the rope and coiled it again, this time laying each turn with care, until it looked like the neat snail shell the bosun demanded. The man gave a grunt, neither praise nor scorn, and moved on. Jan found himself oddly proud. Punishment came quick for those who faltered. A boy caught sleeping at his post was lashed to the mast, left standing hours under sun until his skin turned raw. Another who cursed the mate too freely was given double watches, eyes ringed dark for days. The punishments were harsh but measured. The captain allowed no cruelty without purpose, and that made it bearable. Order was not kindness, but it was fairness of a kind. Jan witnessed his first flogging one hot afternoon when two sailors came to blows over dice. Their fists landed heavy, blood spilled on the deck, and for a moment the ship seemed to hold its breath. Then the mate waded in, his voice cracking. Both men were dragged to the grating, shirts torn from their backs. The bosun's cat-o'-nine tails gleamed, leather ends tipped with tar. Jan's stomach clenched as the lashes fell, each crack splitting the air sharper than thunder. The men grunted, but did not cry out. When it was done, they were set loose, their backs raw, their pride tempered. They shook hands stiffly the next day, both limping but alive. Jan understood then. Punishment was not for cruelty, but to remind them all what bound them together. At night, the men muttered about it. Cornelis, never far from mischief, called it the sea's theater. He grinned as he said it, though the grin didn't reach his eyes. Better a flogging than a hanging, he added, and Jan swallowed hard at the thought. Discipline shaped their days, but so did small mercies. The cook, grumbling as always, sometimes handed out an extra ladle of broth when the weather stayed calm. Peter offered quiet correction when Jan fumbled a knot, saving him the mate's bark. Even the bosun, sharp-tongued, once muttered, "better," when Jan's rope work passed muster. Such crumbs of approval fed men more than salt pork. Still, tempers flared. One evening, as the sun sank crimson, two men nearly came to blows over a place in the mess line. Voices rose, fists curled. It was Peter who stepped between them, his voice steady as stone. "Enough," he said simply, and somehow the word held more weight than the bosun's whip. The men backed down, muttering, the tension slipping away like a wave falling short of shore. Jan marveled at how a single voice could cool fire when used at the right moment. Life below deck reflected the strain. Hammocks swung close, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, and small irritations grew sharp. Snores, coughs, even the way a man chewed could spark muttered curses. Jan felt it in himself, the itch of restlessness, the yearning for space. But there was no space, no field to walk, no gate to swing on, only wood and rope and endless water. He found release in small rituals. Each evening he cleaned his knife, sharpening its edge though it rarely dulled. Each morning he checked his hammock knots, tugging them tight. He learned to patch his shirt with neat stitches, his mother's lessons returning with each pull of the needle. These tiny acts gave him control when so much else was decided for him. There were gentler moments, too. Sometimes, after the evening mess, men gathered for songs. Cornelis would drum a rhythm on a barrel. Others clapped or hummed, and the tune wound through the quarters like a thread. Jan added his voice once, soft at first, then stronger. The sound surprised him. Not the boyish squeak he remembered from church, but something lower, roughened by salt air. The others nodded, accepting him into the circle. Peter, listening with a faint smile, leaned close afterward. "Sing when you can," he said. "It keeps the sea from swallowing you whole." Jan stored the words like another lesson. One afternoon, as he scrubbed the deck, a shadow crossed overhead. He looked up to see the captain himself standing nearby, coat buttoned, gaze cool. The man rarely spoke to common sailors, but now his eyes lingered on January. "You keep your rope neat," the captain said at last. His voice was low even, the kind that expected obedience without needing to rise. "Yes, sir," Jan stammered, heart pounding. The captain nodded once and moved on, his boots striking sharp on the boards. Jan stood straighter afterward, pride blooming in his chest. A single word, but it meant he had been seen. The days stretched long, the horizon unchanging, yet within the sameness, John felt himself altering. He no longer flinched at the bosun's bark, no longer staggered with every roll. His hands, once soft, were hardened now. His back bore the line of labor. He was no longer the boy who had stared wide-eyed at the masts from the quay. He was something else, though he could not yet name it. But beneath the discipline and the routine, unease lingered like a faint drumbeat. The sea, calm now, could turn in an instant. Men, kept in line, could flare with anger. The ship itself, groaning gently, could break if pressed too far. Jan learned to live in the space between order and chaos, trusting the rope in his hand, the voice in his ear, the lessons carved into his skin. That night, as he lay in his hammock, listening to the timbers creak, he thought of the flogging, of the lash cutting air. He thought of Peter's steady voice, of the captain's cool gaze. He thought of the farm, where discipline came from sun and season, not from whips and orders. Both shaped men, he realized. Both left marks. He wondered what marks he would carry home, if home still waited. The lantern swung its slow arc overhead, shadows bending across the beams. Jan closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of wood and water cradle him. The sea did not forgive, but she taught. And tonight, At least, she taught through order rather than storm. Hunger arrived slowly, like tide pressing at the shore. The first signs were easy to miss. Bread that once crumbled with mold now broke harder, the green spots picked away until little remained. Water drawn from the casks grew flat, tinged with wood, and something less pleasant beneath. Salt pork, already dreaded, carried a sourness that clung to fingers even after washing. Men muttered, but lightly at first, as though to speak the truth too plainly might summon it faster. Jan noticed it when he found himself scraping crumbs from the bottom of his tin plate. Crumbs he would once have brushed aside. He chewed them carefully, tongue chasing the last hint of taste. His stomach grumbled afterward, unsatisfied. He looked about and saw the same in the others, men licking fingers, tipping mugs to catch every drop of broth. Hunger had crept aboard, quiet as fog. Rations were cut. The announcement came at morning muster, the captain's voice steady, matter of fact. Supplies must last until we reach the Cape. Half-portion bread, half-portion meat. Water distributed at bells. There were no protests allowed, only a heavy silence, the sound of men swallowing words with dry throats. The days grew longer. Hunger turned hours into weight. Men who once joked while hauling lines now worked in silence, saving strength. Even Cornelis, whose voice had filled the nights with tales, spoke less, his grin tighter. Jan's belly knotted and clenched, a constant ache. Sleep came harder. Dreams of food tormented him, butter melting on warm bread, pears heavy with juice, stews thick and steaming. He woke with his mouth wet and his hands empty. Small betrayals surfaced. A man hoarded an extra crust, discovered by the bosun. The punishment was swift. Lashes across his back, the bread taken and tossed overboard. Men watched the crust sink, their eyes hungry as their bellies. Another man was caught watering his ration of beer with seawater to make it last. He sickened within a day, lips cracked, skin ashen. Hunger taught harsh lessons. John found himself growing sharper in thought, if slower in body. He saved the softest part of his bread to eat last, so the taste lingered. He drank water slowly, swishing it in his mouth before swallowing, tricking himself into fullness. He learned to accept the weevils in the biscuit, crunching them with grim resolve. They were, after all, meat of a kind. Peter shared advice in his calm way. Chew slow, talk less, don't waste strength. He broke his own crust in half once and slid part to Jan, pretending not to notice when the boy hesitated. Take it. You'll do the same someday. John ate it, grateful, though guilt gnawed alongside hunger. The ship groaned forward, day after day. Work continued. It had to. Ropes frayed, sails tore, decks demanded scrubbing. Hunger made each task heavier, but idleness was worse. To sit still meant to feel the ache more keenly. Better to move, even clumsily. Jan's hands trembled on the lines, but he kept at them, the rhythm of pull and brace steadying his mind, if not his body. Below deck, the air thickened. Men lay longer in hammocks, speaking little. Dice games lost their charm when bellies growled louder than bones could clatter. Songs faded, voices too thin to rise. Even laughter turned brittle, a hollow echo. Hunger drained color from faces, spark from eyes. Yet small kindnesses flickered. A man with 2 potatoes from some forgotten sack shared slices with his mates, raw and sharp, but precious. The cook, grumbling as always, ladled broth from the bottom of the pot where the flavor hid, giving it quietly to the weakest. Peter carved a piece of rope into the shape of a bird and handed it to Jan, a reminder of sky beyond sea, of wings beyond hunger. One evening, When the sunset burned gold over calm water, Cornelis finally spoke again, voice hoarse but carrying. "Once in Lisbon," he began, "I ate a meal so fine I thought I'd die from it." The men leaned closer, hungry for the tale if not the food. He described roasted fowl with oranges, bread so light it floated in the hand, wine sweet as honey. His words painted flavors across the dark, filling mouths with memory. Men closed their eyes, smiling faintly. It was enough for a little while, but hunger pressed on. Jan's belt drew tighter, his shirt looser. His arms, once growing strong, thinned again. He caught sight of himself in a polished brass plate, cheeks hollowed, eyes too large. He looked like the boy in his fever dreams, and it unsettled him. He pushed the plate aside, ashamed of vanity, but the image clung. One night, lying in his hammock, he thought of home not as it was, but as it might be. A loaf cooling on the table, steam rising, his mother cutting slices, her hands steady, his brothers reaching eagerly, their laughter filling the room. He almost wept at the thought. The ache in his belly and the ache in his chest felt the same. Yet he endured. They all did. The sea gave nothing freely, but she measured her toll. One dawn, the lookout shouted land. A low line broke the horizon, not yet the cape, but close enough to promise. A cheer rose, weak but real. Men straightened, eyes brightening. Hunger loosened its grip just a little. That evening, with the wind soft and the sky clear, Peter leaned beside Jan. "Fifth lesson," he said quietly. "The sea takes comfort first. Food, warmth, ease. You'll think you cannot live without them, but you can. What you cannot live without is hope. Keep that fed, and the belly will follow." Jan nodded, swallowing hard against the knot in his throat. Hope. He clung to the word as to a rope in storm. Landfall promises relief, but not without unease. The cry came at dawn, sharp as a bell. "Land ho!" The words flew down from the lookout, bouncing off the rigging, carried by the wind until every man on deck straightened. Jan's heart leapt. He ran to the rail, squinting east. At first he saw only mist, a soft band of gray above the water. Then, as the sun climbed, shapes formed, a jagged line, dark against the pale sky. Mountains, the Cape of Good Hope. Cheers rose, weak but real. Men who had grown hollow with hunger suddenly stood taller. Laughter burst, rusty at first, then freer. Some fell to their knees in quick prayers. Others grinned wide, teeth flashing in gaunt faces. For weeks they had chewed stale biscuit, drunk sour water, dreamed of bread and fruit. Now land promised fresh provisions, a pause from the sea's tight grip. Jan clung to the rail, eyes straining. He smelled it before he truly saw it. A faint change in the air, green and earthy, different from salt and tar. It was like breathing memory. Fields after rain, hay in summer, the gate swinging in his village. His chest ached with longing. The ship edged closer. The mountains sharpened, cliffs rising, sheer, gulls circling. The wind carried cries unfamiliar, deeper and harsher than gulls at home. Jan leaned out, watching as the coast unfolded. He had never seen mountains so high, their tops veiled in cloud. He wondered what lay behind them. Forests, rivers, people who lived without ever knowing the deck's role. Orders cracked across the deck. Men hurried to ready anchors, to coil lines neat, to prepare for the bustle of harbor. Hunger lent them speed. The thought of fruit, of fresh bread, of water clear and cool drove them. Even the boatswain's sharp tongue softened, as though he too felt the lift. By midday, they entered the bay. Other ships dotted the water, Dutch, English, Portuguese, each flying its colors. Smaller boats darted between them, sails like wings. On shore, John glimpsed whitewashed buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, fields spreading green. People moved along the beach, distant figures carrying baskets, driving animals. The sight struck him like a dream come true. When the anchor dropped with a heavy splash, relief swept the ship. Men leaned on rails, smiling. Some wept openly, tears carving lines through grime. The captain allowed a measure of cheer, though his voice soon returned them to order. We resupply, we repair, we sail again. Do not forget, Amsterdam is still half a world away. The warning sobered them, but could not quench their joy. Shore leave was granted in turns. Jan's group went the second day. When the boat carried him toward land, his stomach fluttered. The sand looked impossibly bright, the grass impossibly green. His legs wobbled when they touched solid ground. After months of swaying decks, the earth itself seemed unsteady. He laughed, dizzy, clutching Cornelis's shoulder for balance. The air smelled rich, heavy with flowers, dung, smoke. Birds wheeled overhead, their colors bright as spilled paint. Jan stared, wide-eyed. He had thought the Indies exotic. The Cape stunned him with strangeness and familiarity combined. It was Earth, yes, but Earth turned new. Vendors crowded the docks, calling in voices Jan barely understood. They held out baskets of fruit, oranges, apples, pears. The smell alone made his mouth water. He dug in his pouch, hands shaking, and traded coins for an orange. Its skin was rough, warm from the sun. He tore it open, juice spilling over his fingers, the scent sharp and sweet. The taste nearly made him weep. He ate slowly, each bite a miracle. Cornelis stuffed himself quickly, juice dripping down his chin, laughing with his mouth full. "Worth every coin," he roared, tossing peels aside. Peter, more measured, bought a loaf of bread, tearing it into pieces and handing them around. Jan chewed his portion reverently, the crust crackling, the soft inside melting on his tongue. Never had food tasted so holy. Yet amid the relief, shadows lingered. The port bustled not only with sailors but with slaves, men and women in chains, eyes downcast, carrying baskets, under watchful guards. Jan stared, unsettled. He had heard of such things but never seen them. The sight soured his joy, leaving a weight in his chest. He asked Peter in a low voice, "Do they belong to the company?" Peter's face hardened. "To whoever pays. Some call it trade. I call it theft of the soul." His voice dropped further. "Remember it, boy. The world holds more cruelty than the sea." John nodded, words sticking in his throat. He ate the last of his bread, but it sat heavy. The men wandered through markets, eyes wide, spices piled in bright heaps, cloth and colors brighter still. Strange animals tethered nearby, their calls loud and harsh. Jan touched a bolt of cloth, smooth silk, shimmering green, and thought of his mother's hands. He had no coin for it, but he carried the image with him. Later, in a tavern near the docks, they drank ale that tasted of earth rather than brine. Men sang, shouted, laughed until tears came. Jan joined, voice hoarse, head light. For a few hours, hunger was forgotten, the sea a distant memory. But when he stepped outside, the mountains loomed, black against stars, reminding him how far he still was from home. Back aboard, the ship filled with barrels of fresh water, sacks of grain, crates of fruit. Livestock clucked and lowed, tethered awkwardly. The air smelled rich again, the hold alive with promise. Spirits lifted. Men sang while they worked, laughter echoing. Even the bosun cracked a smile when a goat nipped at his coat. But beneath the cheer lay truth. The voyage was not done. Storms waited still, fever too. The cape was a pause, not an end. Jan felt it as he leaned on the rail, staring at the dark line of mountains receding when they set sail again. Relief tangled with dread. They had survived this far. Could they survive the rest? Peter stood beside him, quiet. At last he spoke, voice steady. 6th lesson, January. Land will feed you, mend you, remind you what you miss, but it will also remind you the sea is only halfway done with you. Don't forget that. Jan nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon, the mountains sinking into haze. His stomach was full, his body stronger, but his heart beat with unease. He had seen land, touched it, tasted it, and now he had left it again. Night came soft, stars sharp above, the ship rocking easy. Men slept with bellies content for the first time in months. Jan lay in his hammock, the taste of orange still on his tongue, the image of chained men still heavy in his mind. He closed his eyes, breathing slow, listening to the timbers creak. The voyage stretched long ahead, but for tonight at least, his belly was quiet, his hope intact. Heat presses down, and tiny foes rise unseen. The sea grew warmer as the ship pressed north and east, leaving the cape behind. The air thickened, heavy on the skin, clinging to every garment. Sweat beaded before work began, dripped steadily as the day wore on, soaked hammocks by night. There was no relief, not even in darkness. Below deck, the air hung still, carrying the sour weight of men packed close, of damp wood, of rope and pitch and salt meat. Breathing felt like labor. Jan stripped to shirt and trousers, sleeves rolled high, but the heat clung regardless. His skin prickled, rash rising under cloth. Sleep came poorly, broken by the restless shuffle of hammocks and the endless slap of waves against the hull. He turned from side to side, sheets damp, body never cool. By dawn, his eyes burned, yet the bell called, and he hauled himself back to work. The insects arrived with the heat. At first, a few small black specks buzzing around fruit and grain. Then more, clouds of them, darting, biting, stinging. They seemed to crawl from the very air. They swarmed the galley, the water casks, the crew's hair and clothes. No corner was safe. Jan slapped at his neck, his arms, welts rising red. The itching drove him half mad, and scratching brought blood that festered in the damp. The cook cursed, waving flies from his pots, his voice hoarse with fury. The boatswain barked orders, but even he could not whip the insects away. They were constant, relentless. Flies gathered in the heads, in the corners of the mess, around wounds still raw from lashes or labor. Mosquitoes whined in men's ears, drove sleep further away. Jan awoke one night clawing at his legs, convinced he felt them crawling beneath his skin. He lit no lamp, but he lay there, listening to the chorus of wings, the slap of hands, the muttered curses around him. Sickness followed. Fever spread again, not as fierce as before, but steady, gnawing. Men grew pale, eyes glassy, voices weak. The surgeon moved ceaselessly, his sleeves soaked with sweat, his hands steady even as his own face shone damp. He gave water, vinegar, broth thin as memory. He whispered encouragement, though his own voice was hoarse. Jan watched, learning not just of disease but of endurance. Food spoiled faster. Bread grew soft with mold if not eaten at once. Meat turned sour, crawling with maggots. The cook scraped them away with weary disgust. "Eat fast or not at all," he muttered. Men obeyed, hunger stronger than revulsion. Jan forced himself to chew, eyes averted, swallowing hard against his stomach's revolt. The deck itself sweated. Tar bubbled in seams, rope sticky to the touch. Bare feet burned on sun-baked planks. Men doused themselves with buckets of seawater. relief lasting only minutes before sweat returned. Shirts clung wet, dried stiff with salt, then dampened again. Skin broke in sores that smarted with every motion. John longed for the winds of storm, the chill of northern seas, even the hunger of lean rations. Heat was different. It pressed without pause, wore a man down by inches. He found himself sluggish, thoughts dulled, arms heavy on the ropes. He forced movement, knowing idleness meant collapse. Work became not just duty, but survival. At night, the crew grew restless. Hammocks swayed with tossing bodies, the air thick with groans. Cornelius muttered curses in 3 languages, slapping at unseen foes. Peter lay still, eyes closed, lips moving in some quiet prayer. Jan turned endlessly, sweat soaking his shirt, the itch of bites burning. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and broken. One evening, when the sun sagged low, the ship drifted through a still patch of sea. The water lay like glass, reflecting the sky's fire. The heat doubled, reflected upward, wrapping the ship in furnace air. Not a breath of wind stirred. Sails hung limp, lines slack. Men lay sprawled on deck, chests heaving, tongues dry. Silence pressed as heavily as the heat. Jan lay among them, staring at the sky. Clouds glowed orange, birds wheeled distant. For a moment, he felt the weight of infinity. No breeze, no shore, no relief, only endless air pressing down. His chest tightened, panic rising. He closed his eyes, forced himself to breathe slow, steady, as Peter had taught. One rope at a time, he whispered to himself, one breath at a time. Slowly the panic ebbed. Relief came at last with a night wind. It stirred first as a whisper, then grew, filling sails, cooling skin. Men sighed in unison, the sound like prayer. They stood, weak but grateful, hauling lines with trembling arms. The ship moved again, creaking forward, leaving the glassy patch behind. Hope rose faintly with the wind, yet the insects remained. Each morning brought fresh welts, fresh curses. Jan bore them with clenched teeth, scratching less, enduring more. He smeared tar on his skin once, hoping to keep them at bay, but it burned worse than the bites. He washed in seawater, let the salt dry, found it soothed a little. He learned small tricks, passing them to others, building a fragile defense. Through it all, Peter's voice steadied him. "7th lesson," he said one sweltering night, brushing mosquitoes from his arm. "The sea tests you in ways you cannot strike back. Storms you fight, hunger you endure. But this you suffer quietly. It's patience the sea wants now." Patience and grit. John nodded, though sweat stung his eyes. He clung to the words, as he had clung to rope in storms, as he had clung to bread in hunger. Patience, grit, endure. When at last clouds gathered, bringing rain, the ship and crew rejoiced. Men stripped to the waist, standing open-mouthed as drops fell cool and clean. They laughed, danced, splashed, catching water in casks, in hands, in mouths. The rain washed sweat, salt, filth away, leaving skin cool, spirits lifted. Jan stood among them, arms spread, eyes closed, letting it soak him through. For a moment the heat and insects vanished, replaced by the blessing of rain. That night, hammocks swung in easier rest. The air cooled, if only a little. Men slept deeper, voices quiet. Jan drifted at last into dreamless slumber, his body grateful, his mind at peace. Distant sails remind them danger waits in silence. The first whisper came from Peter, spoken low at the rail. "Pirates in these waters." His tone was casual, as though remarking on a change in weather, but his eyes searched the horizon with care. Jan followed his gaze. The sea stretched wide, glittering in the sun, broken only by low islands and the faint shapes of fishing craft. Nothing looked dangerous. Yet the word hung in John's chest like an anchor. Pirates. He had heard tales in taverns, men with knives in their teeth, faces blackened, voices shrill with cruelty. Now the stories pressed close, made real by the steady line of Peter's jaw. The captain shared no tales. He simply gave orders. Cannon were rolled forward, shot, and powder laid close, lines checked, muskets cleaned. Men worked with quiet haste, no laughter, no grumbling. The air thickened with a silence sharper than shouts. Even Cornelius kept his tongue, his grin gone tight. Jan's hands shook as he carried powder to the gunners. Each step seemed louder than it should. Boots heavy on planks, heart heavier still. He pictured sails rising sudden from behind an island, fast ships darting like hawks toward their lumbering vessel. He pictured grappling hooks, blades, the chaos of men fighting on crowded decks. His stomach clenched, but he forced his hands steady. Powder could not spill. Days passed with watch doubled, eyes scanning horizon. Each dawn brought tension. Men shaded brows, peering into mist, flinching at shapes of rock mistaken for sails. Each dusk, they lowered lanterns, keeping light scarce, as though darkness might hide them from fate. Then, one afternoon, the cry came. Sails. The lookout's voice cracked like a whip. Men rushed to rails, hearts pounding. Jan pressed close, straining to see. Far off, against the horizon, 3 sharp white triangles cut the sky. Smaller than their own sails, but fast and closing. The deck erupted in motion. Orders barked, lines hauled, cannons readied. Jan's chest hammered, his mouth dried. He carried powder again, the bag heavy, his palms damp. Around him, men worked in grim silence, their faces pale but set. The gunners adjusted aim, the bosun paced sharp. Even the captain's voice grew louder, though never panicked. The sails drew nearer, resolving into sleek vessels with triangular rigs. They skimmed the water like knives. Jan's breath caught. This was it then, the moment the tavern tales promised. Blood, steel, terror. His hands shook harder. But then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the ships veered away. One by one they turned, slipping back toward the maze of islands. Within an hour, their sails vanished into haze. Relief swept the deck like wind. Men laughed too loud, voices breaking with tension released. Cornelius slapped Jan on the back, his grin back at last. Too big a fish for them, he said, teeth flashing. They want easy prey, not this lumbering beast. Jan laughed weakly, though his knees trembled. His fear had been real, his body braced for blades that never came. He realized then how thin the line was between safety and chaos, how a single turn of sails could mean life or death. The captain allowed no long celebration. Keep watch, he said simply, his voice carrying. They will not be the last. The crew nodded, sobered. They returned to duties, slower now, but steady. That night, Jan lay awake in his hammock, the ship rocking gently, the creak of timbers steady. Yet his mind replayed the sight. White sails, sharp against blue, closing fast. He thought of the men on those ships, eyes just as hungry as theirs, hands just as calloused, but willing to take life for gain. He wondered if he would have stood or broken had the pirates pressed close. The thought gnawed at him, more than hunger ever had. Peter found him restless and spoke low. 8th lesson, boy. Not every threat strikes. Some pass by, leaving you shaken but whole. Don't waste life on shadows. Save your strength for storms that break. John breathed easier at the words. He closed his eyes, picturing sails vanishing into mist, leaving only calm sea behind. In the days that followed, The crew remained watchful. Every horizon shift brought narrowed eyes, every gull mistaken for a sail until proven harmless. The cannons stayed ready, the powder dry. Life continued, lines hauled, decks scrubbed, food rationed, but a layer of tension clung like salt on skin. Yet routine soothed. Work filled hours, laughter crept back, dice clattered once more. Hunger was lessened by fresh stores, the heat broken by breezes. The sea showed her gentler face, as though reminding them danger need not always strike. One evening, Cornelius raised a mug in the mess. To the cowards who fled, he toasted. Men laughed, drinking deep. Jan drank too, though quietly. He knew it had not been cowardice, but caution. Pirates lived by risk, but not all risks paid. Their lives had been spared by calculation as much as by chance. Still, the memory lingered. Jan dreamed again of sails closing fast, of blades flashing. But he also dreamed of them fading, turning back. He clung to that ending. Let it soothe him. Let it rock him toward sleep. The ship sailed on, steady, leaving the threat behind, though never forgotten. Familiar spires rise, yet hearts beat with doubt. The sea carried them westward, days blending as they always had, bells marking time, ropes creaking, sails shifting. But the mood had changed. After months of danger, hunger, fever, and the brush of pirate sails, the ship now turned her prow toward home. Each sunrise brought them closer, though the ocean made no promise of safety until the final mooring rope was tied. Jan felt the difference in the air. Men stood straighter, eyes brighter. They worked with the same weary hands, but a lightness threaded their motions. Songs rose again, rough but hearty. Laughter returned to the mess. They spoke of taverns they would haunt, of women they would woo, of meals they would devour. Dreams bloomed as real as the sea spray on their faces. Jan listened, sometimes joining, sometimes quiet. His own thoughts tangled. He longed for home, the farm, the smell of tilled earth, the faces of family. Yet unease pressed close. Would his father welcome him or turn cold? Would his brothers recognize the scarred sailor as the boy who had left? He could not know. Storms did not vanish even near the end. Twice the sea rose fierce, driving rain slashing, waves hammering. Men fought ropes with numb fingers, sails straining. Jan braced, his body moving with practiced rhythm, fear present but dulled by habit. He found himself shouting orders to younger hands, steadying them. When the storm eased, he realized he had not merely survived, he had led. One calm dawn, gulls appeared. Their cries pierced the morning air, sharp and familiar. Men rushed to the rails, grinning wide. Land lay still below the horizon, but the gulls told the truth. Shore was near. Jan's chest tightened. He gripped the rail, heart pounding. By afternoon, the horizon shifted. A line darkened, grew into shapes, low fields, then windmills, then spires rising proud. Amsterdam, home. Voices rose in cheer, weak and strong alike, mingling in a ragged hymn. Some men wept openly, others fell silent, too moved for words. Jan stared, his throat tight, eyes burning. He had dreamed of this sight through fever, storm, hunger. Now it stood before him, real. The ship eased into harbor, sails furled, anchors dropped. The air filled with new scents, bread baking, smoke from chimneys, tar and fish, and the rich blend of city life. The harbor teemed with vessels, masts of forest against the sky. Smaller boats swarmed, carrying merchants, officials, families. Shouts echoed, ropes creaked, dogs barked. Men leaned on rails, searching for familiar faces. Some spotted wives or children, calling, waving. Others scanned in vain, eyes clouding. Jan searched too, though he had told no one of his return. He looked for no figure, yet hoped nonetheless, a glimpse of his father's coat, his mother's kerchief. He saw none. Disembarkation came slow. Cargo had to be tallied. Officers checked manifests. Company men in wigs scribbled endlessly. Jan carried sacks, hauled crates, his body weary but driven by eagerness. Each crate unloaded brought them closer to freedom. At last, leave was granted. Men spilled down gangplanks, voices raised in joy. Jan stepped onto the quay, the solid stones jarring after months of wood and water. He staggered slightly, steadying himself. The city spread wide. Canals, houses tall and narrow, bells ringing. He inhaled deep, the air thick with life. Cornelis clapped him on the back. "First stop, tavern," he declared, grinning. "Drink until the world spins the other way." Jan laughed, though faintly. His thoughts turned not to ale but to home. He parted from the others at a crossroads, promises of reunion shouted over shoulders. Alone, he made his way through streets crowded with wagons, horses, vendors, shouting. He passed bakeries, the smell of fresh loaves nearly bringing tears. He passed stalls with fish glistening, cheeses stacked, spices in heaps. He touched his pouch, heavy with wages and the modest profit from his spices, but he kept walking. At the city gate, he hired a place on a farm cart heading south. The farmer, broad and kind-faced, welcomed him atop sacks of grain. The road stretched familiar, fields rolling, ditches glinting. Each turn brought memories, summers swimming, autumn harvest, winters by the fire. His heart pounded with every hoofbeat. By dusk they reached his village. Smoke curled from chimneys. Bells tolled softly. Children played near the church, their laughter high. John climbed down, thanked the farmer, and shouldered his chest. He walked the last stretch on foot, each step heavy with memory. The farm appeared as he remembered. Low house, thatched roof, cows in the field. Smoke rose from the chimney. His throat closed. He slowed, uncertain. Then the door opened. His mother stepped out, basket in hand. She looked older, hair streaked with gray. She saw him. The basket fell. "Jan," she whispered. He froze. Then she ran, arms open, tears bright. She clutched him tight, her embrace strong. He buried his face in her shoulder, the smell of bread and herbs washing over him. Tears came, hot and unstoppable. He was home. Inside, the house felt smaller, yet dearer. The wooden table, the crockery on shelves, the herbs drying from beams, all as it had been. His mother bustled, setting food before him, fussing over his thinness, touching the scar on his cheek with trembling fingers. "You've been through fire," she murmured. His father entered, shoulders stooped, beard more gray than brown. He paused, staring. Silence stretched. Then he nodded once. "You've come back. Not warm, not cold. Simply true." Jan swallowed. "If I am welcome." His father's eyes softened, barely. "The farm needs hands. Sit. Eat." He gestured to the table. January Saturday. His hands trembled as he lifted bread, fresh and warm. The taste filled his mouth. Simple, yet holy. Tears stung again. That night he lay in his old bed, straw mattress softer than any hammock. The silence felt strange. No creak of timbers, no slap of waves, yet comforting. His brothers whispered questions until sleep claimed them. Jan answered softly, leaving out horrors, sharing wonders instead. He drifted into slumber, heart heavy, heart light, both at once. The fields are steady, yet the waves still call. The first weeks at home passed in a kind of dream. John woke before dawn to the crow of the cock, the smell of bread baking, the soft murmur of his mother's voice in the kitchen. He rose and worked alongside his father and brothers, mending fences, tending cattle, spreading manure across the fields that would soon bear spring crops. His hands remembered the tools, though they had grown into sailors' hands, thicker, calloused, rope-burned. The soil felt both familiar and foreign beneath his palms. At first, the stillness soothed him. No bosun's shout, no bells striking every hour, no roll of deck beneath his feet. The work was hard, but it carried its own rhythm, dawn to dusk, tasks repeating with the turn of the seasons. The air smelled of earth instead of pitch, of hay instead of salt. At night, he lay in his old loft bed, listening not to creaking timbers, but to the lowing of cattle and the sigh of wind through rafters. Yet, even in comfort, unease stirred. Some mornings, when he stood in the field, hoe in hand, he caught himself swaying slightly, as though compensating for waves that were no longer there. His body had learned the sea's motion, and it haunted him still. His brothers laughed when they saw it. "The deck follows you home." But Jan did not laugh. He felt marked. Dreams came often. He dreamed of sails swelling with wind, of gulls wheeling over distant harbors, of Cornelis's rough laughter, of Peter's calm voice. He woke with the taste of salt in his mouth, his heart pounding as though he had climbed rigging in storm. By day, he told no one, burying the dreams beneath chores. But they lingered, shadows behind his eyes. The village welcomed him cautiously. Some neighbors clapped him on the shoulder, calling him sailor with a mix of pride and curiosity. Others eyed the scar on his cheek, whispered of storms, pirates, fevers. He was both admired and set apart. Children begged for tales, eyes wide. Jan obliged, but he softened the horrors, spoke instead of flying fish, of birds brighter than jewels, of mountains veiled in cloud. He gave them wonder, not nightmare. At church, the pastor nodded gravely when John entered, as though recognizing a soul who had walked the line between life and death. The hymns sounded different to John now, deeper, their words of deliverance carrying new weight. He sang quietly, his voice roughened by sea air, blending with the familiar voices of his village. His father spoke little, as always, but sometimes John caught him watching, measuring him. Once, while mending a harness together, his father asked, "Will you stay?" The words were simple, but they carried the weight of hope and fear alike. John hesitated. "For a while," he said. His father nodded, saying nothing more. But the question hung in the air, unanswered. His mother fussed over him, feeding him extra portions, pressing herbs into his hands to ease old rope burns. She smiled more now that he sat at her table, but Jan saw worry behind her eyes. One evening, as they shelled peas by the hearth, she asked softly, "The sea still calls you, doesn't it?" He looked at her, startled. She smiled sadly. A mother knows. He could not deny it. The farm's rhythm took hold, yet the restlessness deepened. He found himself pausing at the stream where he had played as a boy, watching its current, imagining it carrying him to larger waters. He stared at the sky, tracing clouds like sails. Even the crows wheeling over fields reminded him of gulls. The sea was everywhere, though unseen. One night, his younger brother whispered in the loft, "Tell me of pirates." Jan hesitated, then spoke quietly of distant sails, of cannons run out, of the fear that gripped men. His brother shivered, eyes wide with awe, not fear. Jan realized then, the cycle repeating. Just as tales in taverns had lured him, his words now lured another. He wondered if he should warn, but his brother's eager face stilled the words. Some lessons could not be given, only lived. As spring deepened, Jan grew strong again, his body filled with farm work's steady labor. Yet each day, the restlessness pulled tighter. He tried to drown it in toil, plowing, planting, mending, hauling. But when dusk fell and the fields lay quiet, his heart turned seaward. He walked the lanes at twilight, alone, listening to the wind in hedges. Sometimes he thought he heard the seas murmur, impossibly far yet near in memory. One evening his father sat beside him by the fire, both men mending tools in silence. At last his father spoke. "You are not staying." It was not a question. Jan looked down, ashamed. "I don't know," he murmured. His father nodded slowly. "The sea marks a man. It marked you. But know this, the farm is here. It waits. You may go, but you may also return." The words lifted a weight Jan had carried since his first departure. He had feared rejection, feared he must choose one life forever. Now he saw he might belong to both. The farm as anchor, the sea as sail. That night, Jan dreamed not of storms, but of calm seas, sails white under stars. He woke with peace, the decision not yet made but less heavy. Weeks later, a traveling merchant passed through, speaking of ships in Amsterdam hiring for Baltic runs. Jan listened, heart quickening. A shorter voyage, nearer to home, yet still the sea. The thought settled in him like seed in soil. He told his family at supper. His mother's eyes filled, but she smiled. His father only nodded, carving meat with steady hands. "If you go, write," his mother said, "and return." "I promise," Jan replied, and he meant it. As summer ripened, the restlessness became certainty. The farm's fields stretched wide, but beyond them waited horizons he could not ignore. He worked harder in his last weeks, leaving fences mended, crops tended, tasks complete. He carved small gifts for his siblings, a wooden bird, a smooth stone polished like glass, a whistle shaped from willow, tokens of love, of return. On his final evening, he sat with his mother beneath the stars. She took his hand, her grip firm. "Your uncle was like you," she said softly. "The sea called him too. He did not return. Promise me you will." Jan swallowed hard. "I promise." She kissed his scarred cheek, tears bright in her eyes. When dawn came, he shouldered his chest once more. His father walked him to the crossroads, the same as before. This time the farewell was calmer. "Fair winds," his father said simply. "Remember your place here." Jan nodded, throat tight. "I will." They clasped hands, man to man. The cart rolled toward Amsterdam. Fields slid past, streams glinted, sky widened. Jan looked back once at the farm, the smoke rising, his family small in the distance. Then he turned forward, the road stretching like a rope toward the sea. Horizons widen, yet home waits with steady light. The cart rattled northward, wheels clattering over stones, horses breathing steady. Jan sat atop the sacks of grain, his chest at his feet, his eyes fixed on the ribbon of road stretching ahead. Each mile carried him farther from the fields, from his mother's embrace, from his father's nod. Yet he did not feel torn as before. This time, leaving was not severance, but expansion. He carried home with him now, stitched into his heart, like a secret sail. Amsterdam rose after days of travel, its spires gleaming, canals alive with barges, windmills turning slow against the sky. The harbor bustled with spring energy. Ships crowded close, their masts a forest of lines and canvas. Men shouted, women bargained, gulls wheeled, dogs barked. The city hummed like a hive, alive with promise. Jan found a hostel near the docks, the same where he had stayed before. The innkeeper, a retired sailor with one eye clouded, greeted him with a knowing grin. "Back again, eh?" Couldn't keep away, John smiled, laying his chest down. "Seems not." The old man nodded, as if no other answer could exist. He walked the quays, scanning ships. He saw vessels bound for the Baltic, their holds filled with cloth, tools, wine. He saw Mediterranean traders, their decks stacked with amphorae, their crews shouting in half a dozen tongues. He saw East Indiamen, massive and proud, their voyages long and deadly. He paused longest before them, memories tugging, fever, hunger, storm, but he did not step closer. Not yet. He sought something smaller, closer, yet still carrying him to sea. He found it in the Nordstar, a stout merchantman bound for Stockholm. Its hull was fresh scraped, its sails new, its crew mixed of seasoned men and eager youths. Jan spoke with the mate, answered questions of rigging, of storms, of East India voyages. The man nodded, impressed. "We sail in 3 days. Berth is yours. If you'll sign." John signed, his hand steady. He felt no fear, only calm. The sea would test him again, but he knew himself now. The days passed in preparation. He bought new stockings, a wool coat for the Baltic chill, a knife his father would have approved. He wrote a letter home, leaving it with the innkeeper to send. In it, he promised return, told of his birth, spoke of love. He folded it carefully, sealing it with wax. On sailing morning, he rose before dawn. The air smelled sharp, salt, and smoke. Men bustled, carts rattled, ropes creaked. He carried his chest to the quay, climbed aboard the Nordstar. The deck felt right beneath his boots, the timbers solid, the rigging singing softly. He found his berth, a hammock this time, not bare planks, and stowed his gear. Peter was there, gray at the temples now, but steady as ever. He grinned when he saw January. "Knew you'd be back," he said. Jan laughed, clasping his hand. "And I knew you'd still be here." They stood side by side, the ship coming alive around them. The captain gave orders, the anchor lifted, sails unfurled. The ship moved, slow at first, then surer, slipping down the channel into open water. The city fell behind, spires fading, gulls crying overhead. Jan stood at the rail, watching, his chest both heavy and light. The voyage proved gentler than those before. The North Sea was rough, yes, but nothing like the roaring oceans of the Indies. The crew worked hard, but laughter flowed freer. Food was plain, but clean, water fresh. Storms came and passed, but Jan found himself steady in them, guiding younger hands, calming nerves. He was no longer the farm boy clutching rope with bleeding palms. He was a sailor, and more, a teacher, a steadying presence. In Stockholm, he walked streets lined with stone, breathed pine-scented air, marveled at women with hair pale as wheat. He wrote of it in another letter home, describing markets, forests, churches. He sent a carving for his sister, a silk ribbon for his mother, a knife for his brother. He sent his wages too, folded carefully, knowing the farm always needed coin. The years passed in rhythm, voyages to Stockholm, to Lisbon, to Venice. Each return to Amsterdam brought a journey home, weeks at the farm, laughter with his siblings, quiet talks with his father, tender embraces from his mother. He kept his promise. He always returned. Time weathered him. His shoulders broadened, his hair darkened then grayed. Lines etched his face, the scar on his cheek softening with years. His voice grew rougher, but steadier. He rose through ranks, trusted by captains, respected by crews. At last, one autumn, a merchant offered him command of a vessel of his own. He accepted with calm pride. Standing on the quarterdeck of his ship, the tiller beneath his hand, he felt the sea open before him, wide and endless. The crew looked to him now, their eyes steady on his. He gave orders, clear and sure. The sails filled, the ship moved, and Jan knew this was the path the sea had written for him. Yet always, after each voyage, he returned to the farm. His mother aged, her hair silver, her steps slower, but her smile as warm as ever. His father weakened, his back bent, his breath shorter. Jan sat with him by the fire, speaking little, their silence filled with understanding. His siblings grew, married, bore children. They welcomed Jan as uncle, as brother, as son, not as stranger. He belonged to both worlds now. The sea gave him purpose. The farm gave him anchor. He no longer felt torn. He carried the ocean's salt and the earth's soil in equal measure. On one quiet winter evening, sitting by the hearth, his mother asked softly, "Do you regret leaving that first day?" Jan thought long, staring at the flames. At last, he shook his head. "It was hard, harder than I ever dreamed. But it gave me life, and it always brought me back." She reached for his hand, squeezed it, her smile trembling. Years later, when his hair had gone white, Jan walked once more to the crossroads, chest on his shoulder, bound for another voyage. His father was gone, his mother frail, his siblings grown. Yet when he turned to wave, the farmhouse stood steady, smoke rising, a beacon of home. He carried that image with him as surely as any compass. The sea rocked him gently that night, and he smiled. He had endured storms, hunger, fever, shadows of pirates. He had seen strange lands, tasted fruit sweet as memory, faced death, and found life. Now he sailed not in fear, but in peace, knowing he need not choose. The farm and the sea both belonged to him, and he to them. Horizons stretched wide, but the hearth's glow followed always. Jan slept, lulled by the sea's cradle, his heart at last whole, his story at rest.